Okay, let's talk about macros. A macro is a feature in Excel that allows you to record an action and then replay that action over and over, just with the click of a button or a keystroke. So macros are really useful when there's a task that you do over and over that would be easy to replicate if you recorded it with a macro. And I'll tell you, when I first became aware of macros, I was really intimidated. It seemed like it was one of those things that's in the realm of developers and coding, and I just imagined that it was going to be really overwhelming and difficult. So if you're feeling that way, I want to set your mind at ease because you might find that macros are a lot more simple than you thought. Okay? And I'm going to walk you through it in this lecture, just the basics of how to create a really simple macro. And then I'm going to show you a couple of other kind of commonly used macros that you can do. And I'll walk you through each one so you can use a couple of these in your own day-to-day Excel work. And that will give you the foundation as well to be able to go on and record your own unique macros for tasks that you do over and over. So the first thing we need to do is go to our developer tab here. And by the way, if you don't have this developer tab, we can add it just by going to File and Options. And in your Customize Ribbon tab, you can customize a lot of things here, but you'll see that we have the developer right here. And if this is unchecked, then it won't show up in your ribbon. So make sure that that's checked and then click OK. And you'll have the developer tab ready to go. And you'll see this section over here that says code. And this is where you create and manage your macros. Now, as I've said, a macro is basically just a recording of a series of actions that you do in Excel that you can then replay. It's an easy version of Visual Basic, which you may or may not have heard of. And Visual Basic, also known as VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications, is actually coding. So with VBA, you are actually writing code or adding code to Excel to make it do even more advanced and sophisticated actions, okay? Now let me just give you a really simple demonstration of how a macro works, and then I'll get into some more useful applications of it. So to create a macro or to record a macro, you just go up here and you click Record Macro. And you're going to get this little dialog box that's first going to ask for your macro name. And so we'll name it. Let's just call this macro demo. And notice how it didn't put spaces in there. You cannot use spaces in macro names. Okay, the second thing it offers is an opportunity to use a shortcut key. And you don't have to do this. You can run a macro just by going up to the macros button up here. But if you want to be able to just run it with a quick shortcut key, then you can just assign one here. So let's just call this one Control A. And one thing to keep in mind is that when you create a shortcut key for a macro, it will override the existing shortcut for that letter. So for instance, if I use Control B, well, that normally will bold text when you use that shortcut key. But if you assign Control B to a macro, then instead of bolding your text, it's going to run the macro. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. If you don't use the shortcut key, again, you can just run it by clicking up here. But we'll do Control A, so we just have one quick button to click. And then you have a choice of where you want to store your macro. Okay? You have three choices here. The one you'll probably use the most is this workbook. What that does is it assigns the macro to this particular workbook only. So whenever you or someone else is working with this workbook, this macro will be here, stored here, and available to use. You can also select a new workbook, which would just basically open a new workbook, and then that macro will be associated with that new workbook. Or you can do a personal macro workbook. And a personal macro workbook will basically store this macro on your copy of Excel. So if you're creating a macro that you use in all kinds of different situations and scenarios, you would then want to use a personal macro workbook so that way if I'm in a completely different workbook or a new workbook that I just created, or an old workbook that I created a year ago, then that macro will be available to use in all of those workbooks. Anytime you're using your copy of Excel, you can call on a personal macro workbook. Okay? But for the purposes of this one, we're just going to say this workbook. And then, of course, you can do a description. And that's really helpful if people, or even you, are looking through a list of 10 or 20 or more macros, trying to find the one you're looking for. If you describe it well, that's going to help you, and especially others who may be using or trying to use your macros. So this one we're just going to call Basic Macro Demo. Okay, then we click OK. And you'll notice up here now it says Stop Recording. Okay. The reason it says stop recording is because it is now recording my actions on this workbook. When I'm finished with my macro and doing my steps, I'll go in and I'll click stop recording and it will complete my macro. Okay. So we're selected over here. I'm just going to do a couple of really simple things, and then I will create the macro, and then I'll be able to go back in and run that macro later. Okay. And we're just going to do 5 random numbers, and then we're going to add them up, and then we'll be able to run that macro, and Excel will do all of that for us, including the formulas and everything. So we're just going to hit equals, RAND, tab. Actually, let's do rand between. Then we can do whole numbers. Tab. And let's just do numbers between 1 and 10. Hit enter, and it gave us number 10. Now we're going to click on that, and we're going to copy that down 5 places. So we're copying the formula down. So now we have 5 random numbers. We're going to click down here. We're going to go home, and we're just going to go click auto sum. It pre-populates our formula, and we hit enter. So now we have these 5 numbers being added up, and then we have our total right here. Okay? And then I'm going to click back up in the top and leave the cursor there. Okay, so now we go back to our developer tab and we click stop recording, and we have successfully recorded a macro. So now let's go to a new sheet, a new blank sheet, and we have, well, actually let's just put our cursor right here, and let's hit Control A to run the macro. And notice what it did. It took the cursor, it jumped up to A1, it put in these random numbers, and it put a subtotal. Let's run it again. Control A. See what it did? It just overwrote the one that we had. It put in 5 random numbers and created a subtotal. Just like that, just with the one click of a button. Okay? And for instance, we could delete all these. We could click back in here, and I'll show you another way to run it. Go to macros, and you see it's got a list of macro names. We only have one macro called macro demo, and that's the one we want. And you see we have some options over here. We can run it, we can step into it, which basically just means to view it in the editor. We can edit it, we can delete it. If you click delete, it's gone forever, and then you have other options here. Okay, but we're going to run it, so we just click run, and presto, it just ran our macro. So I realize that's a really simple example of the macro, but did you see how easy it is to just record the steps that we're doing and then hit the run button, or hit Control A in this case, which is our shortcut key for this macro, and presto, it ran the macro just like we wanted, executed it beautifully. And we don't have to do all those steps again. So you just go in here and select it all and click delete. Okay, I also want to show you how to create a macro button. So we can go to our developer tab, and we can go to insert, and we go to form control, and you see it says button, form control. Just left click on that, come down here and drag and drop. You can see our macro name is right there. I'm going to click on that. We'll say OK. And now it pops up, it just calls it button 1. Let's just rename this. We'll just call this random numbers. And then to finalize that renaming, you just click on a cell outside of the button. And now when we go back in and we click on this, it just runs our macro for us. And I can click on this as many times as I want, and it'll just keep running the macro. I can delete all of this. Click over here, and I can click on it again. It's just going to run it. Run, run, run. Okay? So that's just a cool button to help you run your macro. Of course, you can always go to here, view your macro, and run it from here. You can click the button. Or something else I should show you is that if you want to record your macro, you can go down here, click this button here, and it's going to bring up a new dialog box to record your macro. Okay? So to run your macro, you can click the button here. You can go up here and run it here. You can use your shortcut, which was Control A. Click Control A a few times and I'm running the macro. Those are your ways to run it. To record it, you can click here to record, or you can go down here and click here to record. Okay? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete this for now. I'm going to right click on it and then left click to select it rather than click on it. Hit the delete button and that's gone. So I'm sure at this point you can imagine all of the different things that you can use this for to automate tasks, repetitive tasks that you do all day, every day. Okay? And in the next couple of lectures, I'm going to get into some examples of pretty common things that people use macros for to make life easier.